All right. Welcome, everyone, to the work session on Tuesday, April 19th. We are happy to have everybody in the board meeting with us, and Dr. Gardner, our Chief of Staff, is joining us as Superintendent Moore is headed to the Magnet Schools of America Conference to get some good news from some of our incredible magnet schools. And so to start, we have a continuation from our facilities meeting on the 2022 CIP presentation, and this will be a part of our agenda today in our board meeting as well. So we have Douglas Condon and Mark Strickland here with us to go over the CIP.
Very good. Good to be with you all again this afternoon. We'll wait for the deck to come up on the screen for a moment. Here we go. And as you indicated, what you're about to discuss and see is the final update to this year's CIP, the 2022 CIP. Next slide, please. And just to that fact, we are here with you this afternoon to share the final version of the 2022 Capital Improvement Plan. In this slide, we take a moment to review and share the timeline. This talks about what we've done this year, starting in February and moving to today, where we are today. We talk about the various things that we have reviewed with you all, the space standards and legs, the program assumptions, the student enrollment, the cost model, the executive summary, and of course the rubric prioritization. And then again, as I stated, here with you today, seeking final approval. Next slide. In this slide, this is what we shared with you all last Wednesday at our Facilities Committee meeting. This is known as Option 1A. It's broken into two components. These are our major renovations and our new construction components. And then from top to bottom, you will note the following: North Garner Middle School, Lockhart Elementary School, Brentwood Elementary School, Athens Drive High School, Briarcliff Elementary School, Washington Elementary School, Ligon Middle School, and Zebulon Middle School. Those are all, again, major renovations. In the new construction category, we have HS3, which we know is already had slotted into our 7-year CIP. That's in the West Cary-Morrisville area. We have then 3 to-be-determines: Wendell Zebulon, which, as we noted last week, we're pleased to share that we are able to build a new school for Wendell Elementary School and then ultimately move the existing student population into that school, which is a real win. We have our Pool Road site, and then in northeastern Raleigh, we have a site as well. It is important to note that if something is asterisked, that is land to be acquired. So 2 of those 4 would fall into that category. Next slide, please. In this slide, we take option 1, which is what we shared with you at the board work session 2 weeks ago, and then last Wednesday when we met for the April Facilities Committee meeting, and again today, how we have arrived at option 1A. We are happy to report, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, that one of the major points of feedback that we received from you all was that we needed to have more major renovations in our 7-year CIP. We are pleased to report that we were able to take 3 of our new construction slots and move them into the major renovation category. So that is a plus add of 3 in that component, which is great. One of the other major comments that we received was that we needed to have a high school included in the 7-year rolling CIP. Also pleased to report that Athens Drive High School now fits that category in the major renovation. We also heard comments about the eastern part of our district. We're very happy to report that Zebulon Middle School is now included in the major renovation category, and that North Garner Middle School, which is on its current campus, we are pleased to report that we are able to do a major renovation on the existing campus. We can increase the capacity to a major middle school and include a track amongst all the other amenities, track which they do currently not have. So this also is a win to be able to achieve that in the 7-year rolling plan. Thank you, ma'am. Next slide, please. In this slide, we capture those revisions. This is the first of three, which speaks to the new construction portion of our 7-year CIP. You will notice at the fourth slot from the bottom, Wendell Elementary School is now reflected. No other changes to report on that slide. Next slide, please. In this slide, you will see several modifications which reflect what we just discussed 2 slides ago. You now see North Garner Middle School, Lockhart Elementary School, Brentwood Elementary School, Athens Drive High School, Briarcliff Elementary School, Washington Elementary School, Ligon Middle School, and Zebulon Middle School. A very strong statement in the 7-year CIP that there are several major renovations now included. Next slide, please. No changes to report in this slide. This is our program requirements slide that speaks to several key categories like our life cycle building, PRIMP, and SNAP components. Next slide, please. This is our totaling slide. Important to note, the 7-year rolling CIP totals out at $2.6 billion. The key years that we're honing in on, which are FY years 24 and 25, that's a total of $664,604,000 even. The bond total for that 2-year period is $530,700,000. Next slide, please. And with that, the next step following this afternoon, as Chair mentioned at the start of this presentation, would for this to be on regular agenda this evening for your approval. And with that, happy to take any final comments or questions.
Board members? Ms. Scott?
Thank you again. I wanted to, again, extend my gratitude to the team for reflecting some of the comments from board members, but I specifically just wanted to highlight what I had mentioned during the Facilities Committee meeting, that I believe overall Wendell is very excited about the opportunity for a new school, but there's some sensitivity there with the historic nature of the location at the existing site. So as we move forward, just understanding that this is a sensitive topic, but I believe overall that everyone will be so pleased to have a new building where they can offer their students the very best that they deserve. So I just wanted to, just highlight that, but again, extending my gratitude to all the changes in this new option. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Ms. Cash?
As you know, I'm really excited with the fact that we're adding some additional renovations to this CIP plan, and I think that's important for the county. So thank you for that hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Cash.
Dr. Martin?
Yes, thank you too for the hard work. I think you all listened to what we raised and brought back a really good solution, both for the board and the public. I'd like to reinforce that if you look at this plan, and this really is make sure we do it ongoing, right? You'll notice that we don't have a lot of direct renovation dollars in the proposed bond. It has been shifted, so North Garner actually will start earlier, so that's good. So we now actually do have some renovation dollars in the current bond, but for the most part, the renovation dollars come a couple years, well, not for the most part, they always come a couple years after design. And so the reason we have a limited number of renovation dollars in the current plan is because we didn't have the planning a couple years before. So I think every time we look at this, we should pay attention to it. What we're designing today, or in the current allocation, is what's going to be built in the next round. And that's why we've got the 7-year plan. The one question I did have on looking through the numbers, is I look at the high school renovation for Athens. It is a lower design dollar, and it's 63.7 million, whereas I see elementary schools are more than that. The middle school renovation is more than that. So I'm just a little curious how the high school renovation comes in at a lower rate than our middle and elementary schools. And is that in part because, possibly because we haven't fully evaluated the site, and it could be, I mean, are we confident in that number? Or as we get into thinking about the design,
Thank you for your question.
where's it going to go?
Sure. So a couple of things. So number one, if this were approved this evening, the next step would be to engage an architect to do a more in-depth and drill down feasibility study on that campus. But what I can tell you based on conversations that we've had at the staff level is that while this would be a major, it would still be a partial renovation based on what's been observed on that campus. So we don't believe that larger dollars would be required. We have a high degree of confidence that the dollars that are shown should cover us.
So most of these, well, like North Garner needs a complete rebuild. Washington, I guess, maybe is high because it's a historic building. I mean, if we're going comparison to comparison.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The last thing I'll note, and I really tried to emphasize this at our facilities committee meeting, is, again, thinking long-term. We have roughly 200 schools, and we roughly build schools to have a 40-year life. 200 divided by 40 is 5. That means just to keep up, we should be renovating 5 schools a year. Not 5 schools in a 7-year plan, 5 schools a year. So this is where we are. I think you all have done a fantastic job working with our partners at the county. We always run up against this thing called the debt limit, is what we're told. But we're running up against something more than a debt limit. We're running up against schools that need to be renovated. And so we are going to, looking forward, this is a huge step in the right direction, but looking forward, we've got to come up with better plans because we are getting behind all the time. I'm glad to see Athens on this list. If I understand the history correct, Athens was the first high school built after the merger of the Wake County Schools and the Raleigh City Schools. So I think Athens Drive High School is the first high school of the Wake County Public School System. Building. Yeah. The first new building of the Wake County Public School System. Before that, I think they were independent ones. The reason I highlight that is because there's a lot of buildings that have been built since then. This is the beginning of a lot of schools that are going to need attention. Like I say, a step in the right direction, but as we go forward, and particularly as we have our conversations in the community and with our commissioners, I just think it's important to reinforce over and over and over again that the growth of Wake County really started happening 30 to 40 years ago. That's when we started building a lot of things. And all of that infrastructure that went along with that growth is coming due for major renovation. That's not just schools, but we're dealing with schools, and we've got to have a plan, because if we want the next 40 years to have the quality that we've had in these last 40 years, it's going to take renewed investment. Thank you for this work.
Thank you, Dr. Martin.
Ms. Carter?
Thank you. And thank you. I appreciate, probably I'm going to kind of repeat some of the stuff I said in the facilities committee meeting just in case for those who weren't tuned in or whatnot. But I appreciate the expansion of areas as well, different parts of the county being addressed and adding more schools and the high school. And yes, I am disappointed that Cary High did not, and I will voice my concern again over the rubric numbers and the health and safety being higher for Cary High. I understand that Athens beats them out on school choice, but in the other areas, it's leans towards Cary High minus that one. So I just, am voicing my concern around that. But do appreciate all the work that was done to kind of make this even a larger endeavor, shall we say. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
Ms. Waters?
And I too thank you for all your hard work on this. I just had a question in terms of the timeline on page 7 on the year construction is complete. How did you determine the order of the schools? And I apologize if this was already
It's okay.
discussed. How did you determine which school?
So it was based on slots that we had available in the 7-year CIP. So for instance, North Garner Middle School, you may know that there was a previous slot on the 7-year CIP called the Bryan Road site. And so that was already in our 7-year CIP. When we discovered that we were able to do a full reno on the North Garner Middle School campus and increase the capacity, it was a win because there was reservation at staff level that we could do the same thing for the Bryan Road site. So the recommendation that came back was we can increase capacity, the dollars are already in the CIP, and it's a major renovation. So that's how North Garner Middle School went right into that slot.
Okay. And so then, okay, yeah, I was just trying to understand.
And then
the
as you
order.
descend further down, Lockhart and Brentwood were the next two that were in greatest need with respect to our major renovation category. Athens Drive High School literally got slotted in when the dollars were available for
Okay.
a major high school renovation.
Okay, so a couple of different factors in the order
Yes.
of renovation. Okay. But I am glad to see Athens on the list. I worked at Athens for a while when I was at Wake Tech, so glad to see that one on the list.
Vice Chair Hagerty?
Thank you, Ms. Waters.
Thank you. So again, thanks to Mr. Strickland, Mr. Condon. As you know, we've been, this is a year-round program, right? And appreciate all the work that have gone into all of the presentations, bringing this up for our ultimate vote tonight. As it is a multi-year plan, it's also a plan that we investigate every year, research and evaluate. And so I wanted to just recapture some of the things that we had talked about in finance so that as we go forward, even though we will be adopting a plan for the next 7 years, there are some additional things I think we'll want to look at going forward, and then you can bring your recommendations. Are they good ideas, bad ideas? What can be done? One of the things is the weighting of the rubric that we use in the formula. And this goes to Ms. Carter's point that she had raised about what she thinks about health and safety, but Dr. Martin had a really good acronym for it. I had to struggle to remember it, but where we talked about choice. It was really more about assignment, choice, and capacity, right? As we look at our school needs and how we divide up our dollar, the division between limited dollars in new schools versus taking care of, maintaining, and renovating the schools we have is a constant battle. But while we look at renovation for life cycle, one thing that I'd like us to explore and then get recommendations on is renovation for capacity and utilization, where we have areas of the county where land is scarce, but renovation could add to capacity. Could that solve some of our capacity issues where right now the struggle, we know that we need more schools closer to certain population areas, but there's just not land available for it. Is this something that could be worth exploring? If it is, how would we factor that into the rubric? And again, I don't have any pretension that we'll find a magic solution there, but if it's something we can begin the discussion, talk about, and see with some of these projects, how our renovation of school might impact school choice, but renovation of a school might create swing space available, or might open up swing space that can be used for multiple renovations in an area, or renovating one school in an area that has capacity might allow us through reassignment to draw from some overcrowded schools into a newer, more modern school on an existing school site. And just to address some of those as we look to next year's plans. I'm also curious, in this process, we came up with a lot of specific examples, and everybody sort of has their district school, their pet school, their favorite school, or a particular project that someone brings to their attention. And I think it's important, we've talked about there's renovation projects, but there's also building modifications, the partial renovations. Could you take just a minute, or I could ask this later at the meeting, but just to kind of explain what those differences are, so that if we have projects at schools where an improvement is needed, maybe there's a failing system, right? We might not need renovation of the entire school, but we need to prioritize, a partial renovation of an air conditioning system or a plumbing system, how we would go about that.
So I'll address that. Thank you for the question, Mr. Haggerty, and good stuff. And I remembered ACC. I had written it down, so I had that one down. So what a great opportunity we have moving forward. We're doing some of what you all are thinking and asking about now. We are trying to combine print projects with life cycle projects. And I'll give you an example. If we go in and replace an air conditioning system with new ductwork and stuff like that, we can take the opportunity to put in new ceilings, and we can do new lights, and we can do new ceiling tile, and we can do paint. So we're trying to find opportunities where we can marry projects together, particularly the life cycle and the print projects. And as I shared at an earlier meeting this year, we got you all to buy into redefining what print means. It's a partial renovation. It's not tearing down a building and building something back. It's going to a campus and working within the confines most of the time of an existing building where we can go in and do those partial renovations and make the facility look better, function better, work better for the school. So those are things that we are looking at. And Mr. Haggerty, I might also add, in many of the conversations that we have had, the team and going through this process, Mr. Carrozza, who was at the table, always chimes in about how can we increase capacity and change schools. So just know that base is covered.
That's a good thing, and I'll make sure to thank Mr. Carrozza next time we see him. I guess just the last final thought on that is that there were some concerns raised, when we do the print projects, or maybe we have just a modification or a maintenance issue. Some schools, some school staff, some parents have raised questions about, well, we needed the new security lights, or we needed the new sound system, but does this push us further down on the list for a renovation, especially if there is something like a sewage system or an air conditioning system that might have health needs? How does that work, and how do you kind of weigh the funding between what you prioritize for renovation versus like more maintenance and partial renovation?
Sure. So and thank you for the question. So a couple points to that. Number one, a reminder that end of January, we relaunched the facility needs process, which allows people to go out there and actually submit an application for a need within a school that's of more minor to medium in nature. To Mr. Strickland's comment, it is not intended to be a major renovation. Okay, so it's intended to be more minor in nature. But there is a process in place. Again, it went live late January. It was presented to area superintendents and principals so that they were aware of that process. So important to stress to them that that is out there. There are also other opportunities, and I think it's important to note, per your question, that if something is addressed that's more minor in nature, it is not impacting that scoring on a year-by-year basis. It's something that has to be more significant in nature. An example would be if the roof were replaced, if the entire HVAC system were replaced, if all the windows were replaced. It would have to be more significant. Thank you, Mr. Haggerty.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler, and then Ms. Kushner, and then we'll go back for second rounds of questions from folks.
Okay. Thank you, and I echo my colleagues' sentiments for listening to our long, drawn reasons why, and also trying to figure out how to make it work at large for the district. And of course, absolutely, thank you for North Garner. I feel like it's one of those things where I should take a bow and back away from the table at this point. But I think similarly to, and I think you answered most of my question with Mr. Haggerty's, especially around, because all of us have our small tinies, which is what we call them. So thank you. That was my largest question, is making sure that they don't fall off the list. And I guess, and you can say we don't know this yet, we just launched this, we'll let you know. But I'm also curious, is there a threshold, right? So I think about something that might start out small, like a leak, and you replace a towel, but then later we see that it's been leaking longer than you were able to get to it, and then we might have mold. Like, I'm trying to process how we're going to figure out when and where we create a threshold for things that start tiny but could grow.
I'm going to answer that question the best way I know how, and that's to be honest. So we're working through the process. We are so mindful of the fact that these very comments have been brought up many times about things that are done at schools and how they affect the ranking. So it's undefined. It's been thought of right now, but as we get further into the process, we'll figure out a way to get it in black and white so everyone can know what we're doing and why.
Thank you. And I assumed you wouldn't have an answer this soon, but, I'm thinking about my carpet in my elementary school, and now we got mold. So I was figuring out threshold issues. And I do want to reiterate, the points that have been made that I think Ms. Cash made earlier doing finance, that when I initially came on the board, like, building facility didn't seem to be it wasn't my number one thing of people choosing schools. However, 8 years later, we have built tremendous, beautiful, elaborate buildings that it has increased people's desirability rate based on, there's several factors we all know, but that's one that wasn't a priority. Like, when I knocked on doors 8 years ago, people were not asking me to rebuild some of my schools that now I'm fighting to have renovations or calling you about tinies. And I guess for me, it's really more of a conversation for the board, because to Dr. Martin's point, we are so far behind, we can't foresee how we catch up to most of the buildings that need that level of support. And I guess I'm just asking, what good governance could we and our colleagues at the county start to provide in terms of how do we message this? Because it does impact people's decision and desires in, at the end of the day, Glenn's job, right? His whole shop is impacted with assignment based on something that you all don't have a short answer to. So this isn't about what you all can do. I guess it really, for me, is what is the long-term strategic conversation and messaging that we need to be doing? Because none of us want to be losing students because when they visit a school, all these tiny still existed, because we don't have the capacity to do it, and it's nothing staff can do at this point. But I do feel like, I'm sure you all hear this, so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how we begin to have long-term conversations, not to ourselves, but with the public, so that we're able to help people understand their assignment and choice decisions.
So you're right, we don't have answers, but I can start with this. I think this is the beginning point. We have to be good stewards of the money that we're given, and we have to listen and learn and act, and that's what we've done in getting feedback, not just from you all. We have an entire group of people that have been working on this process, and they came back with some of the same comments that you all had about spreading things out, making sure we shared the wealth with everybody. And so we've listened to many, many groups to get to this point today. I do think that as we are good stewards with our money, with the taxpayer money, and continue to show evidence that we are doing things the right way, it's likely going to be incumbent upon the board to figure out how to move that needle with additional funding.
Yes, and you're right, and thank you for indulging me. And we're all hearing it, right? Like, the impact of our housing market now. We have started to talk about CIP, and I'm sure my colleagues like me are getting tons of calls and conversations about, now that they've had their tax reevaluation, and people, for me, are really putting the pressure on of, okay, well, you're raising my taxes, I agree for this school, however, when is it going to come, quote unquote, to my neighborhood, right? Like, we're familiar with that. And so I think the real conversation, maybe I'll talk to Dr. Garner, since he's my seatmate today, about how do we build that into strategic planning conversations? Because I do think that this is, I think we have a long road ahead of us in terms of helping people understand, and also continue to make sure that Wake is not only their first choice, but the best choice, which is more our job.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. And I'll echo my colleagues, but also, very grateful that in this plan for FY '24 and '25, the life cycle building funds are going up. So we can, and the land purchasing is going up, because I think we need to find that land in Western Wake, and we don't have it right now. So I think it's important to underscore that the program requirement summary does give us some hefty increases, so that, as you said, we can make sure that we are having some facility equity throughout the county and not just focused on new schools. So I appreciate the work to this revised CIP.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. And that's where I, sit with this option, knowing of the growth that's coming, especially in the district that I represent and the new facilities that are here. I've heard over and over again the needs of other communities, of existing schools throughout this district. And I think it's important that we maintain what we have so that we can continue to grow. And I appreciate, in speaking with Mr. Strickland, that this option does not stop any current projects that are happening, and it does not preclude the wonderful work of Ms. Parker from finding land and land banking it for projects as well. And maybe there'll be a savings and we can get one of those schools that was left off the list. But it is the 7-year rolling plan, and we have to take care of what we have. And so I appreciate all of the work that you have done, and listening not only to my colleagues and the needs for their schools, but also understanding that this does not stop the needs of growing communities where new schools are. And I love, renovation and building for capacity. I mean, we have schools where it's the same footprint, but we've added 1 or 2 stories onto the design. What are we able to do with what we have, so that with the shortage of land that's happening in high growth areas? I know there were other questions for second rounds. Ms. Cash and then Ms. Waters.
So as far as not necessarily the CIP plan, but for the schools that are not in the CIP plan for the next 7 years, I know you've helped me understand the facility needs process, used to be called facility modification. So if you have schools that, it seems to me it's 2 different things, but if a school wants to do something in their school at no expense of the county, so it'd be a modification of their facility, but it wouldn't take money from anything. They would spend their own money to do it, like the library at Durant Road Elementary. But I don't know, that seems different than asking for money. It seems like it should go through a different channel, so it doesn't get bogged down in the asking for money channel of facility needs. Can there be 2 processes?
So there are 2 processes, essentially. And you make a good point, Ms. Cash. There are projects that the schools pay for, that they have the money, the PTA or somebody that they pay for. That process and that project gets vetted just like everything else. We don't want the PTA installing something that we are not happy with or that we would not want to put in ourselves. So that process does take place. And then in terms of other things that are done at schools, I mentioned and refer back to the life cycle money that will be increasing in the outer years. That will give us more flexibility and opportunity to do some of these things that we need to do at schools. I can tell you, since I've been here, I've listened, and as I shared with you after one of the last meetings, or maybe it was Ms. Carter, maybe you sent me the email, the PTA president from Durant Road Elementary spoke. I think that was at the board meeting. And as luck would have it, I went to the school the next day and met with the principal, and she's going to schedule a meeting with us, the 3 of us, just to see if we can walk the school and see if there are things that we can do. Now, that doesn't mean that we would place that school in front of anybody else. What it means is we need to listen and find out what the needs are and make sure that within the money and the funding that we have, we are satisfying the needs of the schools and keeping up with things.
So thank you, that's very informative. So when a school, though, it's the same form they fill out for both, whether they want to pay for it or whether we pay for it. It's the same form, right? The facility needs assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
All
We-
right.
we-
Anything?
We turned some of them down. I just want you to know that.
Okay. Ms. Waters?
I think Ms. Cash asked a lot of the question that I had and kind of explained it. But I'm just thinking about one of the schools that was on an earlier potential list. Powell was on a list, and I happened to, I believe, go there the day after we had it on the earlier list. And so they're not up for any renovations, as everyone has a school probably on their mind. So help me understand the process where they could potentially get some of the work that would need to be done to improve the quality of the school beyond the completion of the form. Do you go out? Do you assess? What does that whole process kind of look like? Could you just walk me through that?
Sure. So
quickly?
we have an entire list of projects that we would do with life cycle money. I don't remember the list right offhand, but we have a list of projects of things that need to be done. Keep in mind, those are major things. Those are things like roofs and boilers that I mentioned before. We are behind on painting district-wide. We just haven't had the funding to really keep up with that. Maybe with the increase in life cycle money in the outer years, we'll be able to focus on that more. So we do look at the schools. The area managers that we have in maintenance know the needs of their facilities, and they sit down and go through the list and decide which ones are most important and most critical, and then pick those off the list as funding allows.
Okay, and the area managers, can you explain a little bit about that role?
Sure. They work in maintenance and operations. Those are the guys. They have so many schools and areas, and they are essentially the manager or the maintenance manager of those areas and of those schools. And so when there are issues out there, when work orders are submitted, if things don't go the way they should, then those are the guys that are called to go out and meet with the principal and figure out what's going on.
One here, I think it might also be good to emphasize that this year you all hired external consultants, so an external set of eyes to go and look at, it was our 55 oldest schools, right?
Right, so those were our 55 oldest schools, so maintenance and operations engaged an outside third-party consultant over several months to go out in our district and actually boots on the ground, be on those campuses, walk them, and to assess not only what they're looking like, but actually seeing the performance of the systems.
Because sometimes you need that external set of eyes that sees things that you hadn't seen when you were living with it every day. So I think that was a really wise move.
Seeing no further hands, I want to thank you both for your work on this, the work that everyone has done in the Facilities Committee to bring this so that we fully understand how this is done a little bit better. And we'll see this later this evening after policy and before closed session. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Next up, we have more information, a professional learning update for letters training, language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. And that will be Drew Cook, Michelle Woodson, and Tamani Anderson-Powell. Talking about, and Dr. Gardner, if you have anything to add before we begin?
Thank you, Chair Mahaffey. It was a pleasure to have with us Drew Cook and Michelle Woodson join us, and of course Tamani, I believe, is going to join us as well. I believe she may have stepped out in the hallway, but she will join us. But this is to reorient the board tonight about the letters training that is required training for our teachers. And from all indicators that we have, both from our teachers' experience that are participating in it, as well as our review of it, it is excellent training. The challenge for us in meeting this requirement for our teachers is always around the element of time, how we provide our teachers the adequate time to do this work. We always know that time is a challenge for our teachers. So today's presentation is to reorient you to the framework of the training, but also to talk about some structures, processes, and systems that actually support us in doing this wonderful training for our teachers and addressing the always challenge that we have with time for teachers to do it. So I look forward to them sharing with you the information and some proposals we have to try to carve out the time teachers need for this. Drew, Michelle, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction, Dr. Gardner. First of all, I will say Tamani she got called away, and so had to step away.
Okay.
And so I'm a little nervous about not having her beside me right now, but we will do our best in responding to questions and providing information as best we can. We have been collaborating with her and Mr. Corroz and others that we'll talk a little bit about as well. So we are glad to be back with you all today to share and discuss, as Dr. Gardner referenced, some important updates around the letters training. We've talked about this now for going back about 6 months or so. Today's update and discussion will focus on really two key areas. First, as Dr. Gardner referenced, is a proposed adjustment to our 2022-2023 instructional calendars. And the second is a planned bonus to be provided to teachers who will be engaged in this learning through the spring of 2024. And that'll make up the bulk of our discussion and conversation today. So to that end, as we look at our desired outcomes that have been identified, first we will spend a few minutes reviewing the letter's professional learning framework. I do recall the feedback we got last time to be clear each time we're talking about this, to be certain that we're not assuming or presuming that people understand what this training entails and what it really means, who's taking it, why it's important, et cetera. So we will spend a few minutes referencing that. That'll include just a quick reference to SB 387, which is kind of the statutory reference, also known as the Excellent Public Schools Act that was passed in 2021, which is where the training emanated from in terms of a requirement for all of our districts in the state. Next, as Dr. Gardner referenced, while recognizing the potential positive impacts on student literacy outcomes in the long term, we will be discussing some of the very real challenges to teachers' time and work capacity, which is one of the key drivers of the draft proposal to adjust instructional calendars for the 2022-2023 school year. This proposal will include incorporating 6 2-hour early release days across all calendars, the conversion of an April 2023 instructional day to a teacher work day for tracks 1, 2, and 3, and the addition of 5 minutes to the school day across all calendars in order to preserve the flexibility that having banked time provides in the event of inclement weather in the upcoming school year. And finally, we will share and discuss district plans for a bonus structure for teachers that are engaged in the letters training through the spring of 2024. Ms. Woodson will provide information on the structure, eligibility parameters, and the projected cost of the proposed bonus. And to be clear, we're not asking for any official board action or vote this evening. We really do want to get your feedback, your input, your questions, so that we can incorporate that into a formal proposal to bring before you in the month of May, if it's the board's will to move forward with the proposal as we have laid out this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Woodson, and she'll take us through the core of the presentation.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you. I don't think I've had the opportunity to really be totally in person with you, but I'm glad to see you today. My name is Michelle Woodson, Senior Director for Curriculum Development. And again, we want to begin by really setting the context around what is LETRS, is what the acronym is certainly for, and how we've kind of gotten to this place. So the State Board of Education approved a 3-year contract on August 19th, 2021 with Voyager Sophorus Learning. They have now changed their name, of course, to Lexia Learning, to provide the language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling, that's the acronym of LETRS, training to teachers. And that this training is a part of the science of reading changes that was made to the Read to Achieve legislation, which is SB 387, as Mr. Cook mentioned, the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021. This training is, when I say it's a training, it really is professional learning that is provided to teachers that are working with pre-K to 5 students. And as you know, Wake County has been a leader in this work beginning in 2019-2020 when this board approved funding to begin initial professional learning with some instructional coaches, some instructional facilitators, as well as some other teams of teachers. So Wake County has been assigned to cohort number 2. The state is broken into 3 cohorts, which began training in January of 2022. And in August, when that state contract was initiated, it did amend who are the stakeholders that have to participate to include some of the individuals here. Pre-K through grade 5 teachers in all elementary schools, 1 instructional coach or support staff in the building, elementary EC resource teachers, elementary ELL teachers, and 1 school administrator, and the school administrator takes a 2-day overview of the professional learning. All pre-K teachers will attend the Letters for Early Childhood Educators session, along with other DCDEE, which is the North Carolina Division of Child Development and Early Education Educators as well. And we've already begun that work with those directors. Most of the pre-K sessions will begin in August of 2022. So we have also, as a part of Wake County, created cohorts that include our intervention teachers and our AIG teachers. They are beginning literally this week. And teachers and instructional leaders who were a part of, again, that 2019 cohort as we began this work. So again, to reflect back to the fact that this is a part of the state's implementation process and that the state has divided the districts into 3 cohorts. We began with cohort 2, and with this schedule, Wake County is projected to complete the required training for cohort 2 in the spring of 2024. So we'll be about 2 years into this work. So that certainly brings us to this topic of time. As teachers engage in this work, time continues to be a challenge. The Letters professional learning does require 6 to 8 hours of virtual one-on-one learning. There is work with students to apply teachers' learning in the bridge to practice component of the learning of the professional development, as well as, and additionally, there are 6 hours of synchronous or face-to-face training. And finally, teachers will also work with their PLTs to think about how this learning is applied to the planning for instruction. This challenge about time has led us to consider how we might provide teachers with some of that time to get this work accomplished. So when we think about the opportunity for early release days, that is not a new concept for Wake County Public Schools. Early release days for teachers that are involved in the Letters professional learning might provide them an opportunity to engage in the asynchronous portion of the Letters professional learning. It is also an opportunity for them to work with their PLTs and other teachers to support the application of that learning to their instruction. Teachers not engaged in the Letters professional learning might also have time to engage in needed professional learning that we have not had the opportunity to be involved in over the last 2 years due to the pandemic. So we have a few proposals. Calendar proposal number 1 would be that for 6 early release days per employee in the 22-23 calendar. These days would be for a 2-hour early release for a total of 12 hours that would be taking place throughout the 22-23 instructional year. This will provide time for teachers to engage in the asynchronous work, as mentioned earlier, and for other teachers to engage in professional learning or to meet in their professional learning teams. These are the proposed early release dates for the 22-23 school year. The early release dates for pre-K-12 students does not interrupt the transportation process nor the child nutrition structures for students or staff, as they would be consistent across all schools. This does provide time that is protected within the teacher's workday to accomplish the work associated with this important professional learning. Proposal number 2 is specific to the in-person or synchronous sessions that would be involved in the Letters professional learning, and that is for April 24th, 2023, that this would become a work day for tracks 1, 2, and 3. The implication of that would be that there would be potentially one less day of banked time for those individual tracks, although our next proposal may adjust for that as well. As we think about the implications of time, we want to make sure that we are accommodating for the 6 early release days at 2 hours per day and the 12-hour implication for our current banked hours for weather that might occur. So we propose that we add 5 minutes to all instructional calendars to ensure that we are able to maintain the banked days for weather. Adding 5 minutes to the instructional day for all calendars would allow us to add time to the current bank of hours that we have in place. This would accommodate the needed weather emergencies and offset any concerns about that April 24th date that I just mentioned. This proposal has been provided to principals for their feedback at all levels, and unanimously, we have principals that are in support of the idea of the early release days, as well as the 5 minutes of additional time to the instructional day. The next item we'd like to discuss today is a bonus provided to teachers who complete the master the letters professional learning. The planned bonus structure would pay a bonus 2 times throughout the professional learning model. The payments would be made after Volume 1, which is Units 1 through 4, and again after Volume 2, which is Units 5 through 8. The payments would be $500 for participation in the professional learning and $500 for the mastery of that content. Participation would be identified as completing the online units portion and attendance at the synchronous or face-to-face professional learning. Mastery would be determined by achieving the mastery level on the end-of-unit assessments. Just for context, there are 2 opportunities to gain mastery on that end-of-unit assessment. So if a teacher is not proficient on the first pass, they are able to retake the test. They identify which questions they missed so they can go back and get that content and they can retake that assessment. But in addition to that, Wake County wants to also provide an opportunity for teachers to use a performance task that will be ultimately the application of that learning to their classroom, which would provide them that mastery opportunity as well. These dollars will come from ESSER 3 funding source at the projected cost of $16 million. The stakeholders who would receive this bonus would include all teachers as a part of that state contract. So that is the K through 5 teachers, ESL teachers at the elementary level, 1 instructional specialist, special education teachers on the regular curriculum. Pre-K teachers would receive a total of $1,000 if they did the mastery and the participation. And the reason for that is that they only have half the content that they would be engaging in. Additionally, this would include Wake County employees who began the professional learning in 2019, because we did have some teachers as a part of that cohort, as well as some literacy coaches and IFs. And also any additional cohorts for the intervention and AIG teachers participating between the 2022 and 2024 school years. And I just want to highlight that all of those bonuses would be paid out and completely finished the spring of 2024. So pending your feedback and support today, staff will bring forward a formal recommendation about calendar revisions to the board in a May date as we move forward. And at this time, we're happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for this. I know this is a very intense training, and I don't think any one of us likes having to make calendar changes right now as families are beginning to plan for the next school year, our teachers are beginning to plan. But hearing this required training and all that it is intended to do and how it will help our students, I think is important as well. Are there questions from colleagues on this and these changes? Ms. Scott?
Thank you. So I just had two questions, or two different subject for questions. Looking at the dates that were proposed, I did just, of course, want to raise that I was not on the board when we had the early release days, but I believe as a parent who was impacted by them that childcare, of course, is a concern. And I'm sure we're thankful and have the ability to reach out to lots of partners, municipal, city, camps, and so forth, and that would, in the past, had been able to work to provide childcare for families who need it and look for scholarship opportunities as well, knowing that that would impact. And did just also want to point out that November 22nd and December 21st look like, I think they're right before holidays. And then April 6th is the second night of Passover. I just wanted to point out, I don't know if that will be a concern for any families. And certainly appreciate the opportunity to, and the importance of paying our educators for going through this training. It is a lot of extra intense work. And I think anytime that we are making it clear to our employees that we are compensating them for their time, that we understand their time is valuable, and also understanding, I believe this district had made a commitment to this letters training before it was required by the state, understanding how important this is for supporting literacy in our younger students. I do always I'm a little sensitive about those who don't qualify, and knowing that their subjects sometimes also help draw out reading, enforcing reading and building good habits in their classrooms, even if they're not on that subject, and taking a glance at what the state might do and how they're paying teachers. I think we're all very sensitive to that, so I did just want to highlight those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Thank you for this update, and I always appreciate learning more about the letters and training and where we're at. I just want to voice my concerns about the adding 5 minutes. And I know it sounds like it's just 5 minutes, but if you're an employee that has another job, it's a big deal. If you're a student that has a job, it's a big deal. There's so many things I could go on and on about. So I am concerned because that's every day. And it's that, and I am hopeful that next school year our transportation will be in a much more positive state as far as rivals and support with that. But this, again, if we're 5 minutes adding on to that, some students now, it's just a very, very long day. And for our staff who are having to stay. So I'm concerned around that piece. I understand the reasoning behind it, but I also think, we're asking our school staff again this is an ask of them every day, to add that on, not only our families, but our school staff. So I don't know if there were any other options that were looked at, but that's something, and I too am concerned about the early release. I guess I've lived it as a staff member and also as a parent. So it creates a lot of things. And if you have A/B schedules, and then how you're scheduling this, and you have exams, and anyway, so I hate to just throw that all out there, but that's kind of where I'm at, my thought process. I do have some concerns. And then additionally, like tonight, we're voting again on a schedule for 2023 for the Wake Early College of Information and Biotechnology, that we'd already approved one. Now we're going to vote. That's on the agenda tonight. And then if we're looking at coming back again, and that would be 3 different calendars for this new, Bell schedule. So I just want to throw that out there too, to mention it, because they've already been told one schedule, we're possibly changing again. And then if this is something that is going to be coming back, I know this is kind of an off, but kind of overlaps a little bit. I have some concerns with that too, if that makes sense, but we can address that otherwise, but that's where I'm at.
Ms. Cash.
Well, I may be the only one who got this, but one parent or a couple teachers asked me if they could do the 5 minutes at the beginning of the day. Is there like a 30-minute window where kids can? I just wanted to. I know nothing about timing, and so whether there could be a 25-minute window instead of a 30-minute in the morning, I just don't know anything about that.
Yes, ma'am. And so I think maybe I can combine some thoughts on the two of your your comments and questions. First of all, I think we acknowledge and recognize what you just shared, Ms. Carter. This is not free. I mean, this is an investment, and there is sacrifice involved. And like so many other aspects of the work over the last couple of years, our effort to address and develop solutions to resolve one set of challenges does have the propensity to create others, right? 5 minutes is 5 minutes, but that's 5 minutes more potentially in the afternoon that pushes everything else back, right? And Ms. Cash, to your question, the feedback that we have been getting in terms of our initial work around this from principals in particular is that I think we would lean towards adding it on the end of the day and not the beginning, in part in thinking about transportation in the mornings, the conversations this board has just had in the last couple of weeks about early start times and not wanting to move it any earlier in the day. And so that's still a decision point, and I think certainly when we come back, if we come back with a formal proposal, we'll be very clear. It would be, here's the bell schedule at the end of the day, and here's the rationale and the logic for why. So I think that's absolutely a factor in consideration. And, conceivably, there's another option that's out there, and that is we potentially, again, in the name of giving up one thing to get another, could give up some bank time by not adding the 5 minutes on. We would be cutting it really close in terms of looking at the bell schedule for every single school to ensure then that we're in compliance with calendar law that requires 1,025 hours of instruction. That's certainly something that we're going to be running the numbers on, and it has to be done on a district-wide basis, right? We've got kind of a default template for what the overall numbers are, but then, and this is where Glenn and Tamani and their team and our principals have to go in and look at every single bell schedule to ensure with that razor-thin margin of error that we're all in compliance with calendar law in terms of instructional time. So conceivably, it could be done and incorporate these early release days into the calendar. We'd have to verify every schedule, transition times, lunch times, all of those things. But then the first time we have a snow or inclement weather event, we then don't have bank days to go to make up time. And so then there was a time in the district when we didn't use bank time for that purpose, and it would be a Saturday or it would be, a work day. So there are sacrifices across the board that potentially could occur. And so I just in full transparency, those are conversations that we're having, and I think it's a legitimate discussion and concern to broach.
Further questions? Okay. Excellent. All right, I'm going to come over to this side to Ms. Kushner and then Dr. Martin, and then we'll come back over here.
Thank you. Thank you all. And it's a good, robust discussion. So this is state-mandated training. How does it play with Letterland and some of the other phonics and literacy training that we have done?
Yeah, so this is the training around the science of reading. It's the backdrop of the decision-making that a teacher would make when they're making decisions inside of that curricula of Letterland. Letterland is directly in alignment with what we would use to deliver the instruction to students, so it is not in contradiction to Letterland in any way, shape, or form, or any of our other curricula that we have in place. We have a K-1 framework that uses Haggerty as well as EL education. All of those curricula work directly in alignment with this philosophy around the science of reading. But the science of reading is a framework and a way of thinking about how we deliver instruction to students when we are teaching young children how to read and what the components of that are. So it's really it's good solid professional learning for teachers about how they get to the place, where they're making those instructional decisions.
And I do appreciate that we're making that time for teachers so that this isn't an add-on to the calendar. But I am concerned that this is a pre-K 5 training module that now our middle and high schools are going to have these early release days. And that, and a half day for a high school or a middle school is compromised day. And so you're affecting 6 full learning days for our middle and high schoolers. So I would like to hear more about how our middle and high school principals and staff are viewing this opportunity for early release, because I'm really concerned about that how it's going to affect our middle and high schools. And we're using federal ESSER monies to fund the bonuses for state-mandated training. I just wanted to say that. And I wish the state would fund their mandates. And I would like some consideration, and I raised this with Tamani, and if y'all could consider, given how many of our schools are used as polling sites, if November 8th could be considered as an early release. I know it's a Tuesday. And I know it doesn't fall for the year-round calendar in one of the tracks going out, but but that didn't happen with all of them anyway, looking at the calendar. So I would just ask for some consideration to be given November 8th. And maybe it could be switched for the 22nd, because I'm, having 1.5 days of instruction for that Thanksgiving week. We might not get as robust an attendance that week as we might want. But so just to give some look at those November dates. Thank you.
And I can respond to a couple of the questions I think that you referenced. And first of all, I think the point that you make about the differentiation between elementary and secondary is important. I think we've articulated pretty firmly and clearly that there's a strong need with the elementary training in the letters, right? So I think to your point, we also, the feedback that we are getting overwhelmingly, the observational experience that we have as we get back into schools, is that we have essentially been 2 years now without the ability to provide a comprehensive professional learning program to our district's teachers and staff, outside of how to provide blended instruction, outside of how to provide fully remote instruction in a fully remote environment. A lot of those modules were asynchronous by nature because of the constraints that we had. We've hired over 2,000 new teachers over the last 2 years who have come into our district during that time, many of them at the secondary level, who need and want professional learning on a scale that we just, as every other district, as the case has been across the country, that we've not been able to provide on a comprehensive manner. And so I think part of what I would say in simple terms is K-12, pre-K-12, the need for comprehensive professional learning that truly is supporting teaching and learning in the classroom has probably never been greater across the board. At the very same time, if you think about this perfect storm converging, when teachers' capacity to participate and do all the work required to make that training and learning as effective as it can be for kids has never been more limited. And thus, the proposal to find some way to provide some time, and let's be clear, 12 hours over the course of the school year is not going to be all the time that teachers devote to their own professional learning. It is a small amount of what they'll actually be doing, and all the other work that they're going to be engaged in. But I think it's important to recognize that the need is great. At the same time, capacity is limited. And so the proposal that we're discussing is really our best effort right now for the 2022-23 school year to provide a little bit of time to expand that capacity just a little bit, recognizing that there are going to be some opportunity costs and trade-offs.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Clearly, that's been on your mind. I appreciate that. I do. And actually, your answer spurred another, I do share your concern about the inclement weather days and if we don't have as many banked hours, but given our experience with remote learning, is it possible for us to have, instead of a makeup day, switch to remote learning for inclement weather days? Is that an acceptable question?
So, and I may look to Jonathan to weigh in. So I'll just say this, you may recall that a few months ago when we were talking originally about potentially incorporating remote learning days into the calendar for the purpose of professional learning, we weren't using the term early release day, we were talking about remote learning days. Quite simply, and I'm going to defer to Jonathan, those remote learning days will not count as instructional time to meet calendar law. And so that is not an option.
So that's part of the calendar law restrictions.
That's the reason for the proposal being adjusted to early release dates and not a remote learning day.
Because I've actually heard from folks in the community why we don't do that anyway, and why we have to have makeup days. Mr. Blumberg looks like he's poised.
It's a great question. Appreciate just a quick opportunity on it. You had the 5 days last year by law that you could do that, and that there's been discussion with the School Boards Association about trying to make a push for the General Assembly to bring that back in. It is
because we've been so successful on calendar law in the last 15 years.
Right. Understood. But I mean, right now, if you did that, those hours would not count for your required hours.
Well, that answers my question.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll just add one more thing. You mentioned 2 hours versus 3 hours. There's a thought when we initiated this conversation that would kind of going back to pre-pandemic early release days that were 3-hour early releases. Perhaps we would find 4 3-hour early release dates. And part of the reason for the 2 hours is that, number one, it does impact bank time, but it's also an issue, and if Tamani were here, she could explain it much better than I, to have common dates across calendars. We had to go to 6 and not 4, because otherwise we would end up having a multi-track year-round school that's not on an early release, with bus routes that have to be run for traditional calendar schools that are on an early release, and that was impossible to be able to manage from a transportation standpoint. So we had to go with 6, not 4, and since we had to go with 6, we needed to scale it back to 2-hour early releases so as not to dip too far into the instructional hours.
Thank you. That's
Ms. Kirshner, I just want to thank you for your question and raising the impact about K-12, pre-K-12 in total. I will tell you that aspect of this proposal was unpacked thoroughly as far as what it seems to always surface from input from our teachers and our superintendent's teacher advisory council, as well as our teacher input, because we explored many of these topics with them, is the element of time. They want time. They need time. And so in trying to unpack this was one way that was discussed as possibly being able to address some of that with regard to the need for time. We are constantly reminded of our teachers, whether it be resources, pay, whatever, it always comes back to time. They need time. And so it's an effort to try to see what we can do, knowing we've got to meet this requirement, but also what we can do that will also benefit the greater scale of grade levels from pre-K to 12.
Thank you, Dr. Garner. It's helped a lot, both you and Mr. Cook. Thank you.
Dr. Martin?
So to briefly continue a little bit on the theme of time, I think we have to recognize that we're actually not giving time, because if we're adding 5 minutes to the day so that we don't have to do the banked hours, then all we're doing is shuffling it around. So we're still asking for more work with, we'll get to the bonuses, I guess, but for bonus pay, I guess. But we're really not giving time. We're just shuffling it around. So I don't know if they're, and this is a thing that is so frustrating from the state, because right, it is truly an unfunded mandate, not only dollars-wise, as Ms. Kushner noted, we're using federal dollars to pay the payment part we're doing, but they could have said, okay, here are hours to do some of that training. They could have, given us a little bit of flexibility on that calendar law. Is there any chance? So I'm a little cautious about this 5 minutes to a day, number one, because yes, it meets the letter of the law, but if you add 5 minutes to any school day, you're not changing the learning one iota. Let's just be honest about that. So, I mean, this is the dance to appease the legislature. It is not effective for teaching, and it's not effective for learning. It is merely compliance. So is there a compromise? Could we go a little bit less? If we're doing this banked hour issue, and we don't need it for a snow day, can we maybe make a promise that there's an extra day added for spring break? Or how can we give that time back, I guess, is my question. I mean, I understand we've got to fit the mechanics of it, but I'm looking for, is there a way that we can actually make it be time and not do this replacement compensation?
So that's a great question, Dr. Martin. And I think I referenced it before, irrespective of where we were going to land with adding 5 minutes or not. Our Glenn and Tamani and their team, along with principals and area superintendents, are going to be kind of scrubbing the calendar. And that's a challenge here because bell schedules are slightly different. Some schools have, maybe a minute more passing time, a minute or two more or less lunch time. And so all of that factors into the formula that you're referencing to make sure that we're set in terms of meeting the 1,025. So I think to answer your question, when we come back, I think we'll have some more specifics to be able to say, and I hope I'm not writing checks that I can't cash because this will require work from Glenn and Tamani and their team. But I think we need to be able to say pretty firmly, without doing the 5 minutes, this is how close we're cutting it. Or we can do it or we can't do it. And if we can do it, then maybe it's just 1 day of bank time that goes on the calendar and not 3, which is currently the case. And is that a compromise where we're not having to add the additional time in the day and we feel comfortable enough that maybe the 1 day of bank time gives us a little bit of a cushion, not ideal, and that might be the compromise balance that you're looking for. And so I think to answer your question, we're looking at every potential scenario, not just what we've shared on the screen, because sometimes, as you well know, it's not as clean as just option 1 or option 2. It may be a combination that we haven't yet arrived at.
Yeah, so anything we can do to make it real time, I'd appreciate it. And maybe it's even, here is a day that if we don't use that bank time, you got it, right? Added to spring break, added to, whatever. It doesn't, I mean, right now, right, if we sometimes will not use a snow day, but if we could have if we don't need this bank time, here's the extra, might be a way to get around it. In terms of just a couple technical details, you presented us an option 1 and an option 2. If I understand it correctly, both are things that are to be implemented. It's not really an option 1 or option 2. They're just 2 steps of the bigger whole. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you for that clarification.
So I just wanted to clarify on that. And likewise, I think I know, but for clarification, with respect to the bonus, we say 500 for participation, 500 for mastery, paid in 2 times. Then when we get to the next page, the pre-K get 1,000 total due to less content. I think that means that there are 2 potential 500 for participation and 2 potential 500 for mastery for a total of $2,000. Is that I think is what it is, but I just want to clarify that because I think there's maybe some confusion.
Yes, you're 100% correct. It would be a total of $2,000 for a K-5 teacher. For pre-K, it will be a total of $1,000, potentially $500 and $500, right, because they have half the content. But you're absolutely correct.
I was pretty sure that's what it was with the pieces, but I just want to highlight that for clarification. My last point is, and I do appreciate the need for comprehensive professional development. And I think that we can use the time K-12 effectively. Where my question comes to a degree, you all know my feeling when anybody says the science of, because if you have to use the label the science of, it's probably not scientific. It's probably an acronym to try to say I'm right and you're wrong. But let's sort of set that aside. There are an increasing number of news reports that I've seen that have said, that have questioned, is letters all that it was cracked up to be? Whenever the legislature passes these, this is going to be the be-all and end-all to solve reading at the third grade level. It never works because the legislators are not educators. And like I say, the evaluation, what I'm seeing in the news is kind of mixed. It seems like there's some true value and there's some not so much. So take off your official hat that says we have to do this because the state legislature said we had to do that. My question is this the best professional development that we could be giving our teachers? Obviously, it's tailored to a small core, and we're able to do the professional development for the whole K-12, which I think is really good. But help me understand this based on what I'm seeing, at least in journalistic coverage, that's starting to raise question, is it all that it was cracked up to be?
So I will take a stab at that. I know Sean Johnson, our Director of Literacy, is over here as well. But in my personal opinion, and I think many others' opinion that are certainly here in Wake County, but also across the state that I have talked to, I think we do think that this is the right professional learning. Okay. Because it has the multifaceted components of what you want out of professional learning, right? There's individual learning, there's an opportunity for them to engage and talk with their peers about what they're doing, and then, of course, there's an application piece as well. I don't know that I have heard anybody inside of our district say that this was not quality instruction or quality professional development. There is a lot of conversation about the time component for sure. And I will also say I've been trying to read, as I'm assuming you are and others as well, really not only in North Carolina but across the country, this particular professional learning model is certainly taking hold. And the components seem to be applicable around what is necessary for a teacher, again, to get into that thinking process, to understand the research behind why we teach the way we teach it, to really engage in what are the critical components that all children need when they're learning to read, and then how do we incrementally begin to plan that in our instruction so that we can make an impact. So I personally have not seen anybody that has said that the professional development in and of itself is not positive and is not benefiting them in some way. It's all about time, if I've heard the negative terms. Would you agree? I think that's, and I'm also hearing that across the state as well.
Sure. Thanks for that candid assessment.
And I would just add to that, Dr. Martin, I think that's why we do believe in the training, and that's why we're in front of you, because what we want to ensure that we do when we look back several years from now is be able to clearly ascertain the positive impact of the training and not wonder, well, if we had only created a better runway for implementation, a piece of which is time, wonder whether that was the factor that led to less than desirable outcomes or whether it was the model itself. And I think to your point, that's why we're in front of you today, looking to address the implementation component of this.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Haggerty.
Thank you, Chair Mahaffey. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to respectfully request we bring this topic back, because I just have so many more questions. I don't have a full understanding of it, and whatever venue is the most appropriate. I've received lots of comments and feedback through the day as this has been scheduled on the meeting. To share Ms. Kushner's point, I've had requests about looking at November the 8th as an election day. I've had parents and families that have contacted me with concerns about adding time at the end of the day because of interference with sports and jobs. And I've had families concerned about adding it to the front of the day because of kids getting up earlier, and then traffic concerns, that being a busier commuter hour, especially for our high school students and people who might be young drivers. I've heard from teachers about there were some concerns about front loading these days more toward the beginning of the semester. I didn't see that one as much, but then questions about couldn't we just have fewer whole days dedicated to this? And this gets to, if we're looking at 6 to 8 hours of one of the training cycles and then 6 hours of the other one, you're looking at 12 to 14 hours. Couldn't that be contained within 2 work days as opposed to 6 early release days? And if we're talking about stability for students, stability for the calendar, would 2 more days that we find a way to work in, either with banked time or adding some time to the day, be less destabilizing than 6 new days that are going to have a different schedule than any other days that we potentially have? Again, the training is only required of our elementary school students, which, while a lot of our students are still less than half of our students, but these early release days, because of transportation and everything, affect all of our students. In particular, I was concerned about like our high schools on AB days, where if these are going to be the same classes, how many of the same times of day, because the schedule is going to be constant, right? How many of those AB classes during a semester are you going to miss? And does that push you back? And really just trying to get a better grasp on, what the impacts of the training, which I understand for the elementary school students, and I think that's been laid out really, really well, but just the potential impacts on the rest of the system, the other grade levels that we have. And I know that you all have vetted lots of different scenarios about what could work, what couldn't, but I just need to know more in terms of some of these other concerns that have been brought up, especially as they impact the rest of our students. Why certain scenarios weren't selected, what were the pros and cons you identified, maybe things that we didn't think about, and I'd like a discussion of that at some point. And again, I know we don't have the time for it today.
And we're happy to do that, Mr. Haggerty. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
All right, and we will be seeing this on our next board meeting, so not tonight, but I believe May 3rd. So if there isn't an opportunity between now and then, certainly we can make sure that this is on action and have some further discussion at that time. So appreciate it. And with that, we are done with our work session. Thank you for coming, and we will move on to our regular board meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Roxy, I got you beat. I've got 2 opponents here tonight.
Oh, my gosh.